And the white feather. The first thing Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Kozlov noticed about the American sniper wasn't his weapon. It was how he breathed. Even through the frozen bars of the Stalag 7A holding cell, Kozlov could see the man's chest rising and falling in deliberate, measured intervals. 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8. The rhythm was almost meditative, completely at odds with the chaos erupting beyond the camp's perimeter. February 1942 had arrived with the bite of Bavarian winter, and the distant rumble of Allied bombers reminded everyone that the war was far from over. Sergeant Thomas White Feather Mackenzie had been in German custody for exactly 18 hours when Kozlov first observed him through the barbed wire that separated the holding cells from the main compound. The irony hadn't escaped the German guards. Here was an American carrying a Mosin-Nagant PU, a Soviet sniper rifle he'd claimed from a fallen Russian position, captured while trying to extract a downed British pilot behind enemy lines. They called him a scavenger, an amateur playing at being a soldier. His rifle now lay confiscated in the camp armory, its distinctive white feather still tucked beneath the scope mount like a small act of defiance. But Kozlov, captured 3 months earlier during the chaotic retreat from Moscow, understood differently. He'd watched Mackenzie during the intake process, noting how the American's eyes catalogued every detail: guard rotations, weapon positions, the exact spacing between watchtower searchlights. This wasn't a desperate prisoner processing his fate. This was a hunter studying new terrain. The breathing technique fascinated Kozlov most. Even in captivity, even stripped of weapons and dignity, Mackenzie maintained that strange rhythm. 4 in, hold 6, release 8. It seemed to anchor him to something deeper than fear or rage, a discipline that transcended the barbed wire and watchtowers of Stalag 7A. From his own cell, Kozlov watched the American adapt to the camp's brutal routine. Morning roll call in the frozen courtyard, where breath formed clouds and boots stamped against concrete to maintain circulation. Work details that stretched from dawn to dusk, hauling supplies or clearing snow from the compound's endless pathways. Evening soup that tasted of little more than salt and wishful thinking. Through it all, Mackenzie breathed, that careful, controlled rhythm that seemed to create pockets of calm in the storm of captivity. Other prisoners noticed it too, the way he moved through the chaos with an odd sort of peace, never rushed, never panicked, always observing. Kozlov began to suspect that Mackenzie's capture had been less accident than calculation. The man carried himself like someone who'd chosen to be here, who'd walked into this cage for reasons that went deeper than a failed rescue mission. And that breathing technique, it wasn't just marksmanship discipline. It was something else entirely. On his second night in Stalag 7A, as searchlights swept the compound and guard dogs patrolled the perimeter, Mackenzie caught Kozlov watching him. Instead of looking away, the American nodded once, a small acknowledgement between professionals who recognized each other across the divide of nationality and circumstance. That was when Kozlov knew the real war in this place wasn't between guards and prisoners. It was between the man each of them had been before capture and the man each might become before this ended. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp. And stay with us for the next chapters. The opportunity came at dawn on Mackenzie's 4th day in captivity. A coordinated Allied assault on the nearby ammunition depot had drawn most of Stalag 7A's garrison away, leaving only a skeleton crew to guard nearly 200 prisoners. In the confusion, electrical power to the camp failed, disabling the perimeter lights and creating gaps in coverage that lasted precious minutes at a time. Kozlov was returning from the latrine when Mackenzie approached him in the pre-dawn darkness. The American moved with that same controlled precision Kozlov had observed, his breathing technique helping him navigate by sound and memory alone through the compound's maze of barracks and administrative buildings. "Russian," Mackenzie said quietly, an accented but clear Russian. "You understand tactics." "American," Kozlov replied in English that carried the weight of 3 months' observation. "You understand something else." What Mackenzie proposed seemed insane. Break into the armory, retrieve specific weapons, and provide covering fire for a mass prisoner escape attempt. But the plan hinged on something Kozlov had never encountered. Mackenzie's unconventional breathing technique, something he called slow breath, which he claimed could extend accurate shooting range far beyond normal expectations, even with iron sights. "The armory sits 140 meters from the nearest cover," Kozlov pointed out, speaking Russian now. "Well within range of the remaining guards. Even with weapons, we'll be outnumbered and outgunned." Mackenzie's confidence was absolute. He explained how controlled breathing could steady the heart rate, reduce natural body tremor, and create windows of perfect stillness lasting up to 12 seconds. Combined with the Mosin-Nagant's inherent accuracy, he believed they could neutralize key targets before the guards could organize effective resistance. "This isn't about escape," the American said. "This is about proving something can still be done." As if summoned by their whispered conversation, British Flight Lieutenant James Harrison and French resistance fighter Claude Dubois emerged from the shadows. All three had been watching Mackenzie, Kozlov realized. All three had reached the same conclusion about what the American represented. The breakout plan was elegant in its simplicity. During the next power failure, they would slip from the barracks during a planned distraction. Mackenzie's breathing technique would guide them through the darkened compound to the armory, where weapons abandoned by guards called to the perimeter awaited recovery. But it was Harrison who raised the crucial question: what happens to the breathing when people start shooting back? Mackenzie's answer came with that same measured rhythm that had caught Kozlov's attention days earlier. 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8. "The breathing isn't about staying calm," he said. "It's about staying present. When your body achieves maximum stability, you see opportunities others miss. You make decisions based on what is, not what you fear might happen." Kozlov understood then why the German guards had called Mackenzie a scavenger. He wasn't just talking about taking weapons from a fallen Russian position. He was talking about taking something deeper, techniques, disciplines, ways of seeing that transcended national boundaries and military doctrines. "This slow breath technique," Kozlov said. "Where did you learn it?" Mackenzie smiled for the first time since his capture. "From a Lakota elder in Montana. Said it was older than any of our wars." The irony struck Kozlov immediately. Here in a German prison camp, an American was proposing to use ancient Native American wisdom and a Soviet rifle to prove that individual expertise could still matter in a war increasingly defined by industrial mass and technological supremacy. "When?" Harrison asked. "Tomorrow morning," Mackenzie replied. "They'll hit the depot again. Same time, same confusion." As they separated back to their respective barracks, Kozlov found himself breathing differently. 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8. The rhythm felt foreign at first, then strangely natural, as if his body remembered something his mind had forgotten. The breakout began at 3:47 hours, exactly as Mackenzie had predicted. The second Allied assault on the ammunition depot created the same chaos as before. Guards rushing to defensive positions, communication lines jammed, and another power failure that plunged Stalag 7A into strategic darkness. Mackenzie moved with startling precision through the darkened compound, his breathing technique serving as both navigation tool and source of unnatural calm. Kozlov followed close behind, amazed at how the Americans seemed to anticipate obstacles and guard movements in near total darkness. Harrison and Dubois flanked them, their own breathing beginning to match the rhythm Mackenzie had taught them. Within 8 minutes, they'd reached the armory. The door hung open, abandoned in the guards' haste to reach their emergency posts. Inside, weapons lay scattered across wooden tables. rifles, ammunition, and there, almost glowing in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, Mackenzie's Mosin-Nagant PU with its distinctive white feather still tucked beneath the scope mount. "Like they were keeping it for me," Mackenzie whispered, running his fingers along the rifle's familiar contours. But it was what happened next that redefined Kozlov's understanding of marksmanship. Positioned behind a maintenance shed, Mackenzie began engaging targets across the compound with methodical precision that seemed to transcend normal human capability. Each shot followed the same pattern: the deliberate breathing sequence, a moment of absolute stillness, then the sharp crack of the Mosin-Nagant. At ranges exceeding 200 meters, in pre-dawn darkness, he systematically eliminated watchtower positions and communication points. The technique wasn't just about accuracy, it was about timing. The slow breath method allowed Mackenzie to fire during natural respiratory pause, when the body achieves maximum stability. More importantly, the extended breathing cycle gave him time to observe, calculate, and wait for optimal shot windows. Guards expecting rapid, panicked fire found themselves facing a sniper who seemed to anticipate their movements. Kozlov provided covering fire with a captured rifle, but he was essentially watching a masterclass in applied physics and meditation. Each of Mackenzie's shots created ripple effects across the compound. Guards repositioning, communications failing, prisoner columns beginning to move toward the breached perimeter fence. "How is this possible?" Harrison asked during a brief lull in the action. "It's not magic," Mackenzie replied, cycling another round. "Just paying attention to what your body already knows." As prisoner columns began moving toward the breached perimeter fence, German reinforcements arrived from the depot assault. Mackenzie's position became untenable, but his breathing discipline proved crucial in a different way. Under intense return fire, while Kozlov and the others provided close support, Mackenzie maintained his controlled rhythm even during rapid displacement. The technique that had made him deadly at distance now kept him calm under pressure, allowing clear thinking when split-second decisions meant survival. He wasn't just teaching them marksmanship, he was demonstrating how ancient wisdom could transform modern warfare. But it was Claude Dubois who noticed the deeper implication. "Mon Dieu," he said, watching Mackenzie work. "This is not about killing. This is about becoming impossible to kill. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward. And share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history." Kozlov would later write that in those crucial minutes, 47 prisoners discovered something more valuable than freedom. They learned that individual skill, properly focused, could overcome apparently hopeless tactical situations. But the cost of that knowledge was just beginning to reveal itself. The escape succeeded beyond all expectations. 47 prisoners, including critical intelligence personnel and downed aircrew, reached Allied lines over the following 3 days. Mackenzie's precision fire had eliminated 11 guard positions and disabled camp communications for the crucial first hour. But for Kozlov, the real victory was psychological. Prisoners who'd felt helpless and forgotten had discovered they could fight back effectively when leadership, technique, and opportunity aligned. The breathing method had spread through their small group like a quiet revolution, transforming desperation into focused action. Dr. Wilhelm Hauser, the camp's medical officer, found Mackenzie in the infirmary 3 days after the breakout. The American had taken shrapnel in his left shoulder during the final push to the perimeter, and Hauser was cleaning the wound with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to see patients rather than prisoners. "This breathing technique of yours," Hauser said in heavily accented English. Where did you really learn it?" Mackenzie studied the German doctor's face, noting the fatigue lines and the way Hauser's own breathing had unconsciously begun to match the rhythm he'd observed during treatment. "You've been watching." "I've been trying to understand," Hauser admitted. "My son was captured at Stalingrad. Probably in a Soviet camp if he's still alive. I keep wondering if there's something like this. Some way to stay human when everything else falls apart. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Kozlov, recovering in the next bed from his own injuries, listened to the conversation with growing fascination. Here was the enemy, a German officer asking an American prisoner for wisdom that might help his son survive Soviet captivity. "The technique isn't American or German or Russian," Mackenzie said finally. "It's older than any of our wars. It's about remembering that your breath connects you to something bigger than whoever's pointing guns at you." Hauser finished dressing the wound in silence, but Kozlov could see the doctor practicing the breathing pattern. 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8. The rhythm was becoming a language that transcended nationality and military doctrine. That evening, as guards conducted their usual head count, Kozlov noticed changes throughout the compound. Prisoners who'd witnessed the breakout carried themselves differently, straighter, more alert, but also calmer. The breathing technique was spreading without formal instruction, passed along through demonstration and quiet conversation. But it was Mackenzie who identified the deeper transformation. "It's not about the breathing," he told Kozlov as they stood at evening roll call. "It's about what happens when you stop holding your breath. When you stop living in fear of the next moment and start living in this one." Obergefreiter Franz Müller, a young guard barely 20 years old, had been watching the prisoners practice the breathing technique. His own father had been killed in North Africa, and his mother's letters spoke of constant air raids, food shortages, and the gnawing fear that came with each official telegram delivery. "Herr Mackenzie," Müller said quietly in broken English after the evening meal. "This breathing, does it work for guards too?" The question caught everyone off guard. Here was a representative of their captors asking for the same wisdom that had helped prisoners survive their darkest moments. Mackenzie's response would echo through Kozlov's memory for decades. "Son, fear is fear," Mackenzie said. "Doesn't matter what uniform you're wearing. If you want to learn to breathe, I'll teach you to breathe." Kozlov realized that Mackenzie's technique was accomplishing something unprecedented in the brutal arithmetic of war. It was making everyone involved more human, not less. The method spread quietly through various military units, becoming part of an unspoken doctrine that had nothing to do with official training manuals and everything to do with survival of the spirit. How long can someone carry 2 conflicting truths without breaking? The central secret of Mackenzie's technique was revealed 3 weeks after the breakout, when Kozlov discovered him practicing before dawn in the exercise yard. But this wasn't the controlled breathing method that had made him legendary among the prisoners. This was something different, more vulnerable, more honest. Mackenzie was shaking. Not from cold, though the Bavarian winter bit through their thin uniforms, but from something deeper. The breathing pattern that had seemed so controlled, so masterful, was actually helping him manage what Kozlov recognized as deep trauma. "The breathing doesn't make you fearless," Mackenzie admitted when he realized he'd been observed. "It just helps you function while you're afraid." The white feather from his Mosin-Nagant scope mount sat in his palm, recovered during the breakout, now serving as a talisman for memories he couldn't escape. Mackenzie explained that the feather came from a hawk that had died during his first combat mission, when he'd frozen at a crucial moment and his spotter paid the price. "I developed the breathing technique because I was terrified of freezing again," he said. "Every shot, every mission, I was fighting not the enemy, but my own fear of failing someone who counted on me." This reinterpretation of everything they'd witnessed struck Kozlov like a physical blow. The man they'd seen as unshakable was actually the most frightened among them, and had transformed that fear into a discipline that saved lives. Dr. Hauser approached across the exercise yard, no longer bothering to maintain the formal distance between captor and prisoner. "Mein Gott," he said. "This is why it works. You're not teaching courage. You're teaching people how to be useful while they're terrified." The revelation rippled through the compound like shockwaves. Prisoners who'd adopted the breathing technique realized they weren't learning to be fearless warriors. They were learning to function as human beings under impossible circumstances. But it was the German guards' reaction that proved most telling. Müller and several others had been practicing the breathing method, initially viewing it as some kind of combat enhancement. Learning its true purpose, fear management rather than fearlessness, made them respect it even more. "My father wrote about this," Müller said quietly. "From the trenches in the last war, he said the brave soldiers weren't the ones who felt no fear. They were the ones who stayed at their posts while their hands shook." Mackenzie's technique represented something larger than marksmanship or even survival training. It was a form of mental discipline that acknowledged fear while refusing to be paralyzed by it. The breathing pattern created space between stimulus and response, a crucial pause where choice lived. That night, Kozlov wrote in his secret diary, "Today I learned that heroes and cowards feel the same fear. The difference is what they do during the 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8. The white feather had become a symbol of transformation rather than skill, proof that the most broken among us might develop the tools to help others avoid breaking. Mackenzie carried the hawk's feather not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the cost of freezing when others depend on you. Dr. Hauser's son would never return from the Soviet camps, but the breathing technique would. Other prisoners carried it to different fronts, different wars, different moments, when the choice between function and paralysis meant the difference between survival and surrender. Mackenzie's admission changed everything and nothing. The breathing still worked, still provided that crucial pause between fear and action. But now they understood what they were really learning. Not how to be unafraid, but how to be useful despite being afraid. What would you remember more? The fear or the moment you chose to breathe through it? Kozlov was repatriated to the Soviet Union in March 1943, part of a prisoner exchange that felt more like stepping between different versions of captivity. Mackenzie remained at Stalag 7A until liberation, using his breathing technique to survive interrogations, medical procedures, and the grinding psychological warfare of prolonged imprisonment. But it was their correspondence over the following decades that revealed the technique's true legacy. Kozlov adopted Mackenzie's method during his return to combat duty on the Eastern Front, writing that the slow breath had saved his life multiple times after that February morning in Bavaria. More importantly, it had preserved something essential about who he was beneath the uniform. The method spread quietly through various military units, becoming part of sniper doctrine without formal recognition. Veterans carried it home to civilian life, where the same breathing pattern helped them manage everything from job interviews to family arguments. The technique that had been born from fear and refined in captivity became a bridge between the impossible demands of war and the equally challenging requirements of peace. Mackenzie survived the war and returned to hunting guides in Montana, rarely discussing his military service, but occasionally teaching clients the breathing technique when they struggled with buck fever or difficult shots. He never explained its origins, just described it as something that helped steady the hand and clear the mind. But Kozlov maintained correspondence for decades, and their letters revealed the deeper truth about what they'd discovered in Stalag 7A. The breathing technique wasn't really about marksmanship or even fear management. It was about creating space for choice in situations where choice seemed impossible. In 1968, during the height of the Cold War, Kozlov wrote, "I teach the breathing to my grandsons, though I pray they never need it for the reasons we did. But they live in a world where fear comes in many forms: examinations, competitions, conversations with girls. The 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8, works the same whether the enemy is a German guard or a mathematics test." Mackenzie's final letter, written just months before his death in 1987, contained a confession that shocked Kozlov. The white feather was never about the hawk. It was about admitting that I was more afraid than anyone knew, and that being afraid didn't disqualify me from being useful, maybe even made me more useful, because I understood what everyone else was feeling. The Mosin-Nagant PU was lost during the escape, abandoned when Mackenzie's position became compromised. Yet Kozlov insisted the rifle itself was never the point. It was simply the tool through which disciplined breathing and patient observation created impossible opportunities. In a war increasingly defined by industrial mass and technological supremacy, one American prisoner had reminded fellow captives that individual expertise, properly focused, remained devastatingly relevant. But the real lesson went deeper, that the most human response to dehumanizing circumstances might be to help others breathe. Dr. Hauser emigrated to America in 1951, establishing a small practice in Wyoming where he occasionally encountered Mackenzie during hunting seasons. Neither man spoke directly about Stalag 7A, but Hauser continued teaching the breathing technique to patients suffering from anxiety, trauma, and the quiet desperation that came with surviving, while others didn't. Kozlov's final entry in his war diary, written 50 years after liberation, captured the lasting impact. We thought Mackenzie was teaching us to be warriors. He was actually teaching us to remain human while doing necessary but inhuman things. The breathing created space for conscience in situations where conscience seemed like a luxury we couldn't afford. The technique continues to spread, passed along through veteran organizations, martial arts schools, and therapeutic communities. Few practitioners know its origins in a Bavarian prison camp, or understand that it began with one man's terror of freezing when others needed him most. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. The white feather, lost somewhere in the chaos of escape and liberation, remains the perfect symbol for what Mackenzie accomplished. Something fragile and seemingly insignificant that, when properly positioned, could change the trajectory of everything that followed. Even now, when someone practices the breathing technique, 4 counts in, hold for 6, release for 8, they're participating in a quiet act of resistance against the forces that would reduce human beings to their fears and circumstances. They're proving that individual discipline, properly focused, remains devastatingly relevant in any war worth fighting.